Okay, good morning. We're in Ayin Beis. We're now in volume 3, the third volume. And on page 1208. 1208. Now, you all have the pages that were posted. I believe we also posted it now on ayinbeis.com as well. Actually, we just took the PDF and put it up there. So that if you want to follow, you can look at it there as well. Okay. Summing up where we're up to, what we've been learning. So yes, we've entered a new phase. And since it's Sunday, I'm going to do a little more overview. Remember, the theme of Ayin Beis is interface. Keser, in the language of Kabbalah, it's called Keser. In the language of Chassidus, it's called Rotzen. And that's the first interface, as he explained literally on page 1, page 2 of Ayin Beis, all the way in the beginning of volume 1. That the first interface is that you have to want something. If God doesn't want existence, there's nothing to talk about. Same thing with human beings. If I have no interest in giving this class and there's no Rotzen, we're not connecting. So Rotzen is the critical first step. And again, in the logical system, the way God created, God could have done it many different ways. But we're talking about the way he did it and the way that is based on the logic that God chose to use to create existence. So then Rotzen is a critical first point. But Keser is not sufficient because you can want something and that doesn't mean you have a system and a method of connecting. You need to have now a systematic approach. And that's what we call Seder Hishtalshlus. Seder Hishtalshlus is another, in simple English, is God's system that he built. The cosmic engineer built a system of how to connect. Rotzen means he wants. So Keser establishes that there's a connection. God wants something, and now he's going to fulfill that. It's like, I want to build a house. That's very good. Without that, there's no house going to be built. But then you have to know, how do you build a house? You have to bring in a contractor, and you have to bring in all kinds of details. What type of house? You need plumbers, electricians, bricklayers. I mean, I'm just using a few examples. So that is called Seder Hishtalshlus, or more specifically, in contrast to Rotzen, which is a makif, that's called Pnimi, Eris Pnimim. So again, the language of Chassidus, Keser, Rotzen, are the overall so-called driving forces that bring everything into being. But then comes what is called the Eris Pnimim, Pnimi. And that's internal energy. A second track where God said, I also will now create a track which is going to define. This is what we call the Esser Spheres. Rotzen is the desire to create a structure. Like we spoke about the example of the artist. God chooses to become an artist. And he can do infinite types of art. But then he chooses in the infinite types, which is called Spheres Ein Ketz, chooses 10 spheres. Eser v'lei Tesha, Eser v'lei Achad Aser. 10 and not 9, and 10 and not 11, and 10 and not 9. This is going to be the parameters of existence. This is the building he's building. Just an analogy I gave. This is the house he's building. And then comes the whole process that we've learned at length of how that comes into being. All this is extensively explained in Ayin Beis. But these two tracks now, so we can call that the Er HaBligvul, and the Er HaGvul is sometimes the way it's described. And now, when you create the structure of existence, it has to be aligned with the Rotzen, the initial desire, and the initial desire has to manifest itself in this specific way. But then come many more dynamics that are necessary. In order for this to actually be implemented, you need to have a tzimtzum, you need to have the kav, you have to have all kinds of details. I'm not going to go through every aspect because that's really learning all of Ayin Beis and all of Chassidus. But I'm just mentioning it. So the whole bunch of tools, so to speak, necessary to put all this into place. But in many ways, you could describe things in terms of mamala kalaman and sevav kalaman, which is, again, another term. When I said before, keser, rotzen, sevav kalaman, makif, igulim, are all essentially synonymous. Even though they have specific expressions of this idea, they're all in the context of the transcendent. When you talk about things like esespheres, pnimi, mamala kalalmin, instead of igulim, yesher, makif pnimi, I'm just contrasting, sevav mamala, rotzen spheres, then you're talking about the second track, which is the internal energy. Now, each one has a mile over the other. The rotzen, or let's call the er hablikvul, is much more reflective of the source, like the ayin of the yesh amiti, because it's expressing what God wants. The er pnimi, on the other hand, is much more reflective of what God actually wants, the specifics. And therefore, they need to work together side by side. The ultimate goal, of course, is we're not just building a home to build a home. We're building a dir lo yizbarach, a home for God in this existence, in this world, in this lowest of worlds, in the deepest concealment that's possible. Tachtenim, tachten shein tachten lamatim imenu, as the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 36 in Tanya. It can't be lower in the context of the concealment. This is the deepest possible concealment. And the purpose is that the human being, the soul, should come to this world and reverse the process and reveal the connection of the individual and his or her life and the world in which they live in, their corner of the world, connected, first of all, to the divine intentions within the Er HaGvul, which is the Er that relates to and is tailored to existence, and ultimately connecting to the Ratzon, to the Er HaBlikvul, to that which was reflected by what God wants. In other words, doing it on God's terms, not just on our terms, which would be the ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti. Or different language, das Tachten is the divine as it relates to existence. Das Ayin is the divine das as it relates beyond existence, above existence. And you ultimately want both, and you want the most integrated. Now, by God, it's all integrated because it all originates from Him. But the Chiddush here is not that God is the Chiddush, is that we, who on our own are very limited parameters and structures, are able to connect to all these levels. That's the ultimate goal. And when that happens, then you talk about the fulfillment of what we call tachlis hakavana. That is essentially the world of la'asad lave. Shiur comes, the future, when all this integration will be there in the most powerful possible way. Now, in volume 1, the first part, the first half of volume 1, more or less, I say half, not literally half, but the first big section that ends with Vayigash Ayin Gimel really lays out these two tracks, the Er HaGvul and the Er HaBlikvul, where what he calls Makif and Pnimi, or Keser and Spheres, and goes into detail. The first 50 chapters is more or less about the Er Pnimi, the immanent energy. And there are 3 levels in the Spheres. Sphere from the word counting, from the word relating, narrative, Sipur, Mispar, Sipur, and Sapir, illuminating, shining, transparent. And then he explained that the 3 levels also exist in Makif. That Keser has three meanings and 3 levels. One that relates to the Pnimi. That's basically the Ratzon as it's right above the specifics, details. Then there's the Ratzon as it is a little above that and doesn't relate so much to the details. And then there's Atik, that's beyond it all, which is completely reflective of what God wants. In a way, it's similar to what we learned recently, that there's the Er HaBlikvul that just reflects, it's not just Mina Etzem, but Kamoya Etzem. All it cares about is reflecting what God wants. Then there's the Er that begins to relate to existence, and then there's the Er that manifests in existence. Essentially, Mamala Sevav and Etzema Er, if you wish. Er Pnimi, Er Makif, and the Etzema Er. What we sometimes refer to Mamala Sevav and that which is higher than Sevav. That was referred to in the recent Maimorim at the end of volume 2. In the second half of volume 1, the Rebbe Rashab begins to discuss the dynamics of these 2 energies. He says, Er HaBlikvul introduces bittul to existence. because it's beyond existence. So it introduces us to go out of ourselves and to connect to something beyond us. Eir HaGvul, even though it also brings bittul, but Eir HaGvul's main function is to give us being, to give us a sense of existence and consciousness, including bittul, but it's still on our terms. And of course, you need both, because that's the only way you can have both, the best of both worlds. And he explained that the difference is between the Ovis and Matan Torah. The Ovis, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, their main goal was to bring the world back to the way it was pre the sin of the tree of knowledge, the Chet Tzadas. Because when God created the world, as we know, like we learn in the Maimer Basel Legani, everything was aligned. But there was a potential, and what happened was, unfortunately, that through the sin of the tree of knowledge, the divine was concealed, the Shekhinah was nostalgic, which means concealed, and then the subsequent generations, it got worse, till the point there needed to be a mabul, a flood, to cleanse the world, start again. Avram was the first to reverse the process and begin bringing the Shekhinah back down, which means to reveal. Moshe Rabbeinu, seventh generation from Avram, would conclude the process with Matan Torah, and then the building of the Mishkan, v'shachanti b'seicham, like it was when the world started, before the tree of knowledge. Then, of course, the Chet Egel reintroduced the toxins. Chazra zu masan is the expression. The tumah, the impurities returned, even though by Matan Torah Pascha they stopped, they paused, and the rest is history. Ever since, we now have the power of Matan Torah, which I'll speak about in a moment, to transform the world, but we still have to contend. And that, after, subsequent to that, came all the other generations, that even though a Beis Hamikdash was built and a second Beis Hamikdash was built, but still was not complete, and we're still in Golus, waiting any moment for the Geula. But how do you explain it? So here's what he says. So the Ovis, just to use a simple example, the pipes, the Eir HaGvul that God used to create existence, the structure, became not aligned with the God's intentions, and definitely not aligned with the Eir HaBligvul, which is God's Ratzon and what God wants in this whole thing. The Ovis, if you wish, cleaned up those pipes, those pipelines of the Eir HaGvul that got rusty and toxic and polluted by man's sins and transgressions, which, as we learned, creates a state of a lack of health, of cheli, of illness. They became polluted. Avram began to heal the world because he began to reintroduce God into the picture. But essentially, the Ovis, what they accomplished was they got Eir HaGvul back in place. But the Eir HaBligvul was never really fully in existence in the first place, because if you remember, that receded due to the Tzimtzum. It's like in the back end, but not part of our consciousness. In our consciousness, the divine was concealed, the Ovis, and concealed even further through sins. And the Ovis made the world a healthier place again. Moshe concluded that process by Matan Torah, says the Rebbe Rashab in the second half of volume 2. Matan Torah introduced Eir HaBligvul, Eir Chodosh, more than just cleaning up the pipes of Mamala Kalalman. In other words, the energy of divine energy, that the world should be aware that there's a God on the world, on the terms of our existence, but also to recognize a God that's beyond existence. Recognize, I should say, godliness that's beyond existence. And that was Matan Torah's Chiddush. However, Matan Torah only gave the power to do so. Alter Rebbe says in Tanya language, Kfar hoya le'elomim me'ein ze b'Matan Torah, that La'osed Lover will be the full revelation of the divine, both Eir HaGvul and Eir HaBligvul, and all united. But by Matan Torah, we had a taste of it. When it says, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, well, Moshe Amar Alei, when Moshe and Hashem met, heaven met earth, El Yenim and Tachtenim joined, even though there was up till that point a schism, a gzera, that separated them. So that was a taste. And from there on came the work that we need to do, using the power of Matan Torah and Sinai, to create that full integration in our own Aveda, starting with our Nefesh Habamis, to heal our own illnesses, spiritual, the different levels that we learned, the dissonance the misalignments and realign ourselves to godliness, both the Eira Gvul and ultimately the Eira Bli Gvul. But the Eira Bli Gvul, as we learned, you achieve actually through tshuva, is through the concealment that leads you to a deeper thirst and a deeper yearning and aching to reach to the highest levels. Umka deliba, the depths from our heart reaches the tzimoyin, reaches the rotzei from within us, reaches the highest levels. And there too, we learned about 3 levels of rotzei, of how we climb and return and reconnect. And la'asad level will be the culmination of that process, and then the growth will just continue because everything is Ein Sof, deeper and deeper. But in the context of our discussion here, that was what he discussed in the volume 1. A lot of this is volume 1. And then later, volume 1 moves into more discussion on the interface and ultimately on the connection of where you connect, how do every level in Ishtalshus connects to a higher level. For example, this is all in general terms. But at the end of the day, where do the 10 spheres meet Keser? So the discussion of Chachmas Tima, Arich and Atik, the connection of Aleph and Pella, how Chachma connects to that which is higher. Some of it we also learned recently. Then the connections of all the different levels of interface through Ishtalshus that help us connect one level to the next. So even though in general terms I just described it, but the real hard work and the real challenges in each level, because remember the pipes, the interfaces are not just one; they have to be through the whole process. If there's one link that's broken, it affects the entire achdus and unity. Then he moved to 2 different ways that this unity is achieved through the pasuk Arimimcha Lekai Hamelach that we say every day in Ashrei. That it's either Mamayla Lamato, where you're drawing down Arimimcha Keser Bli Gvul into Elekai HaMelech, which is the Eira Gvul, the Elokus, translates in Elokim, Elekai. Arimimcha would be more like Havaya. Elekai HaMelech, into Elekai and Melech Malchus, that's through Torah. And the other is Mamata Lamaila, that you elevate Elekai HaMelech to Arimimcha. And that led into a whole discussion of, began with Tefillah, Mamata Lamaila, the parentheses that were middle of the Rebbe, the Magid, the Mezritcha Magid's Teira and Er Teira on Aselecha Shtecha Tzeitzres, which means craft to build 2 trumpets, Chatzoy Tzuris, 2 halves of one image, which is the soul and the godliness. And the discussion that began with that was a long elaboration, which we're middle of actually, of that unity, which includes connecting to the Eira Gvul, to the Eira Bli Gvul, but also connecting also not just Atzilus, but even the lower worlds, Biyah, even after the Parsa, even under the Tzimtzum, should also be able to connect to the highest levels. Which led, of course, to the question how that happens. How do you connect a post-Tzimtzum reality to pre-Tzimtzum consciousness when they seem to be completely antithetical and actually predicated that existence requires the concealment of the Er HaBli Gvul, or the air before the Tzimtzum? And the answer to that was we transform the Tzimtzum. Through our work, we transform the concealment because it's not an end in itself. As we even learned here in the beginning of volume 3, that the air before the Tzimtzum is Kelo, encompasses the Kavanah to reach existence post-Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum's Kavanah is not concealment, but ultimately to reveal. So the truth is, Havaya has within it Elokim, Elokim has it within it Havaya, and thus, that is the ultimate purpose, that we can unite and integrate both Havaya and Elokim, and all the 2 levels of Havaya and Elokim. Havaya, like pre-Tzimtzum, with Elokim and the Tzimtzum, and also Havaya Delatata, which is the divine as it relates to the Eira Gvul in existence, connecting to Elokim, which is the concealment. The lower Elokim that relates to how it conceals the divine within existence. So basically, the Eira Gvul and the Eira Bli Gvul are both concealed initially. And then we connect. Teaches us that we connect the higher level of the divine. Firstly, the level of divine that's within the Eir HaGvul should be revealed through Elokim. So Havaya Elokim in Ba'aretz Mitachas, the earth below, the Eir HaGvul, and then there's on a higher level Havaya Elokim in the Eir HaBli Gvul. That we reach levels that are pre-Tzimtzum, and that too is connected with Havaya Elokim, and then the combination of both of Havaya Elokim is all together as one. As we summed up actually in the beginning when we learned that last page on page 1207. And as he says, and the ultimate is that the Eir Makif will radiate in the Eir Pnimi b'Eifin Goli. So it'll be a total integration between the two energies. What I said before, the Eir HaBli Gvul, the Rotzen, Aramimcha in Elokai Melech, and Elokai Melech with Aramimcha. The words that he uses here is Elosi Yavaya Chadash Shmaya Chad Chiber Beis Amadreges Sha'er Hainu Sha'er Makiv Yer Begili Bepnimis. So this line goes literally back all the way to the beginning of Ayin Beis. That's the connection to it all. Now, of course, I didn't cover many details here. That's why at the end of the day, it is 1,200 pages. And I can't say I summed up 1,200 pages. I summed up the central themes and the main points and the main coordinates. But there's a lot more. And I just wanted to make that connection because it helps understand the whole context. But now comes the question, what is Ein Eid? And this the Rebbe Rashab did not address at all till now. Till now, it was all about how Eir HaGvul and Eir HaBli Gvul, like he says, the main thing is Gili Havaya. Now comes a whole other story. What about the Tzimtzum itself, the very darkness itself? In psychological terms, yes, trauma and crisis and challenges can lead to growth. But what about that moment of trauma itself? That moment when we did not feel hope, when there was a total black hole, an abyss. That was also done by God. That's also an element. It's true, it's B'Shvil HaGili. It's in order to bring Gili. But Ein Eid is going to teach us how darkness itself will become a source of light. Not just it leads to light, but it becomes a source of light. So what I'll sum up now is the last 2 pages, or last page actually, that now we're talking about Shem Elokim Atzmai. B'chinas Elam Yeh B'chinas Gili. Just like Shem Havaya. Not that Elokim will not conceal on Havaya and will lead us to reveal Havaya Elokim. That's the first half of the pasuk. Ein Eid says there's nothing. Ein Eid means there's nothing else. Nothing else means that even the darkness of Elokim itself, Laila Kayem Yoyer, the night itself will radiate. And he explained on page 1208, I'm summing up what we learned last class. When it says, that the moon will be like the sun. So he explains this is not that the moon will shine, be a full moon, that the moon itself will be its own luminary, receiving straight from the source itself. So let me sum up what we learned here, and then I'll stop for any questions, and then we'll continue. That's the game plan. So he explained like this. Today, the moon we know is in a diminished state, and less lamagamoklim, less sirad magamoklum, it doesn't have any light of its own. Any light the moon has is from the sun, which in Ruchni that's Malchus, that doesn't have any energy of its own. I mean, it exists, but it's in a state of concealment. It receives its light from Shemesh Havaya, which is Zoh. So here we have the Levana is like Elokim. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't use that word, it'll just confuse matters. Yeah, well, you could use, no, we will use that word. It's the Levana is Malchus like Elokim, the Shemesh is Havaya Zoh. Gilui is in the domain of Havaya. Levana on its own, Malchus on its own, Elokim on its own is a state of concealment. Okay. Now, in that itself, there are variations. The new moon, the new month. So the moon is just being born. The full moon is its full strength, but only the full strength of a moon. it's still not like the sun. It's still reflecting the sun, and its power is not like the sun. It's weaker than the sun. So there are variations in the very way that Malchus, or the moon, or Elokim goes through its cycles. So in the times of Shlomo HaMelech, when it says that Kaima Sida B'Shlemusa, he was the 15th generation from Moshe. So the moon was full all the time, which means as it reflected to earth, because the moon is always full, technically, but you have to be in space to see that. So he says that was Zah and Malchus, sun and moon. It's called Yichud Shimsha V'Sira, the unity between the sun and the moon. That's when you have Zah and Malchus, B'panim, face to face. So therefore the moon is full. V'shavim b'kaimosan. They're equal. They're shavim b'kaimosan because the moon is full, just like the sun is full. However, the expression, and this is from Eitz Chaim, Shari Mir Teireach, chapter 2, Ach kisre lamayla mikisra. However, even then, when there's something they're equal in the sense that they're full. Like, not on the 15th of the month, the moon is either a crescent or 3/4 or partial. The sun is always full. We see always a full sun. So on the 15th of the month, you see a full moon, but it's still not equal to the sun. So the keser of the sun is still different, is higher than the keser of the moon, which in Kabbalah means that the sun is receiving from Teferes of Bina, which is the source of its light, and the moon is still receiving from the sun. On the 15th of the month, the moon doesn't change. It's still reflecting the sun. The only thing is it's reflecting it entirely. And he calls that the 6th level. When you look at Eitz Chaim, he talks about the levels of the Aliyas HaMalchus. So the lowest level is when Malchus is completely concealed. There's no moon, utter darkness. The moon is completely no light at all. And then as the moon grows, or the moon, what they call waxes, it begins to shine more. These are Aliyas and Malchus, with the ultimate being, the 6th level is a full moon. But it's not the highest level. The 7th level, then he says, never happened yet. We never experienced the 7th level. That will be L'Asid Lave. And Ach L'Asid, I'm just reading inside, just a few lines. Then it won't just be a full moon. The moon will then have its own direct line to the source of light, to Teferes of Ima, as he calls it. That means Keser Echad L'Shtayim. Because now what happens is the sun is still the source. So the moon is full, but it is still coming through the sun. But then the moon will bypass the sun and will have its own source of light straight from the same Keser Echad that the sun receives. And remember, the argument of the moon to Hashem was, you can't have 2 kings with one crown. In other words, the moon was claiming, give me the crown. And God said the opposite, I'll give the crown to the sun, and you will be diminished. And you lech ma'atetz asmacha, you go diminish yourself. But then L'Asid Lave, when there's the tikkun of the Pagam HaLavana, when we repair, and by the way, Pagam HaLavana doesn't say it here, but it's often referred to as the illness, the injury of the moon, the wound. The wounded moon will be healed to the point that not just that it's a full moon receiving from the sun, but will be receiving straight, Keser Echad. So the moon was wrong. You could have a Keser Echad L'Shneim. You could have one crown, one Teferes of Ima that serves as a crown to 2 luminaries. The sun doing its job, Zah, and the moon doing, and the Malchus doing its job. And that's the 7th level. But then the Rebbe Rashab went a step further. Omnom, he says, so that's where now we have the Levona Ka'er Achama. But then he says, when you say Laila Ka'yom Yoyer, that the darkness will shine like day, Hu shalayla atzma teir, that the night itself will shine. So now he's talking deeper, because even the seventh level, the Levana is a luminary. It's not darkness. It was just in a state of darkness during Golus. It's a luminary, and it's receiving now its so-called electricity from the same power source as the sun is. But there's something deeper. What about the darkness itself? What accounts for that? So he says the darkness itself, he says, will radiate. But it itself will radiate. Malchus itself, as a state of Helam, will radiate on its own, not because it receives from Teferes Deima. In other words, not only will the moon be like the sun, but the darkness that the moon experienced and Malchus will have something that's not even like the sun altogether, something that's higher even than that revelation. In other words, darkness has something that revelation does not have, basically. Because as long as it's receiving, even from the source of light, Tiferes of Ima, of Bina, it's still me'eze er. When you say the darkness itself will radiate, Malchus on its own will radiate, and that's when Malchus becomes higher than not just the moon will be like the sun, but it will be higher, and then the Zah will be higher than Zah, and that's when Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila, the opposite. Malchus will be the Atara, will be the crown that gives to Baila, to Zah. And then in the parentheses, he says even higher than that, as we shall explain. So in the Asid Lavi itself, we have three levels now. We have the sun, the moon is like the sun, but it's Eir. We have that the darkness itself starts to radiate. That's higher than the sun, higher than Zah. Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. And the parentheses, he doesn't explain yet. He just says there's even a higher level than that. He brings from the Zohar next, which essentially says this point that the moon, Malchus, will be not a garment and not an accessory, but it'll be Atar al Reisha, it'll be the crown on the head of Zah, of the sun. And then he said, Malchus not only will be equal to them, but it'll be mashpia, transmit to them. Because it will be, Malchus, I'm just reading the last four lines. The light of Malchus will be a awesome and exalted, very exalted light, to the point that all the spheres which are level of Gilui, Yikablu mipchinas HaMalchus, will receive from Malchus. And this is all not Malchus as it receives, as it is on its own. He brings several verses and interprets them this way, that Elokim will be in a state of kindness and revelation, love meaning revelation. The Elokim will be compassionate and bless us. The blessing of Shem Elokim will be in a very high and elevated level. And that's the true Gili. The true revelation in the future when night will shine like day. So what do you have now? Not just Havayu Elokim. That would be the Eir HaGvul and the Eir HaBli are connected, but they're both Eir. And even Elokim is now you reveal its purpose. Its purpose is to reveal. You see the Havaya through in Elokim, see the Elokim in Havaya, but at the end of the day, it's a revelation of either finite energy, which is the divine energy within existence, or infinite energy beyond existence. And now he's introducing Ein, the third level that we're going to relate to is going to be the Etzem. Etzem, that's higher than Gili altogether. Because everything till now is all about revelations. Now we're going to reach a place, the highest level possible, where we reach the Etzem that's beyond Gili and Helam. And that the Helam reaches what we're going to learn, Helam Ha'atzmi. I don't want to jump the gun here, but basically he's going to talk about the third level in Yichud that we see in Ein, that's more than the Yichud of Ayin Elokim in the first part of the pasuk. Okay, so that was a mouthful. Would anybody, it was not it was a pretty long summary, but I think it'll help the whole context. But I'm happy to take any questions. Obviously, the subject matter itself we're going to learn now, continue to learn. But somebody may have a question on the overall or something, so please feel free.
What is Chetz Yom El Hayom HaKadomoini?
It sounds to me, Mayim Chaim Yerushalayim sounds like Malchus, that from Malchus will come Mayim Chaim, the Sheirish HaChayis, and it'll be Mashpia. Half of that will go to the Yam Kadmeni, would be the Spheres. That's what I think he's saying.
So this is the Gilui from the Osid Lovoi, the Chosh will shine?
The Malchus itself, will shine and give Eishes Chayil, will become like the Keser, That's what it looks like he's saying.
And what about the other half?
What other half?
Didn't you say half will go to the...
I can't tell you what he doesn't say here. You'd have to go look up another Maimarim that discuss this. The other half Malchus still remains higher than them. So only part of it is going down. The power of the Helam only can shine into the Gili, and doesn't mean all of it does. That is Bapash what he's saying, but I would have to go look up. It doesn't say anything more. He just uses that verse as proof that Malchus will be mashpia l'chol ha'sfiros.
I have a question if people are finished on that point. What does it mean when it says the Levan or Elokim will draw from Tiferes to Ima? I mean, that why is it that that represents a crown? What is it about? I understood there was something about Bina drawing down from Bina. I was listening to the last class from Friday, and you were going through this. And what is it about? I remember you saying Eishes Chayil Teres Bala, but I don't know if those concepts are connected. But how is it?
They're not. They're two different things entirely. Two different levels.
Okay, yeah. Can you explain what it means? That there will be Kesser Achad. This is about 15 lines up from where you ended.
I know what it was said. Yeah, it's
okay.
There's the stages that I laid out now. Did you understand?
Yes.
Okay, so this first stage is that the moon is not just receiving from the sun, even a full moon is still receiving from the sun, which means that the sun is higher than the moon. So the sun is more connected to its source. And the moon, and it serves like an intermediary that shines toward the moon. In the future, the moon will be like the sun, the way it was meant to be in the beginning of creation. And both of them will be receiving from one power source. It's called Tiferes Avima. So the Keser is Tiferes Avima. One track goes into the sun and one track into the moon. And the moon has now light of its own straight from the source, not through the sun, not through Zah.
No, conceptually, I understand exactly what you said. I guess I'm asking about the Kabbalah. Maybe this is background knowledge, but what is it about Tiferes the Ima that represents Keser?
Every level compared to lower levels is always a Keser. So Keser means it's a higher force. It's above them. It's like the crown.
But you would think, and I'm sorry, I mean, we can take this offline, but you would think that if both are drawing from that source, that has to be the highest source. But Tiferes the Ima doesn't sound like the highest source. Orient itself is the highest source.
To me, Tiferes the Ima sounds quite high.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean by high. To me, even Malchus is high. So I'm not sure what you mean by high. It's a very relative term. Compared to Zah and Malchus, Tiferes Ima is a very, very high level.
Tiferes of Ima is higher than Zah?
Of course, Bina is always higher than Zah. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chaydish, Seid, Malchus.
Okay, fine. They said it was Bina, but above Bina is Chachma. So you think that
and above
drawing
Chachma,
down
and above Chachma,
there's
also levels.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about those levels. We're talking now the levels that relate to Zah and Malchus.
I understand, but you would think that, okay, I don't know, you would think that...
But who would think? I wouldn't think. Tiferes Ima is a very high level. It's higher than Zah and Malchus. As I said, to me, even Malchus of Asiya is a high level. This is Malchus of Atzilus. So,
but we're talking about the Kesros of Shem Havai and Shem Elokim. How much higher can it go?
Where do you see here Kesser? First of all, Kesser of Shem Havai, Shem Elokim is on all levels. It's in Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. Kesser is everywhere. So it all depends.
So are we talking just about Asiya? Are you talking about Asiya?
No, we're talking about Atzilus, actually. Zah
okay. Right. So
anyway, right now we're just talking. This to me, this is now becoming pure semantics and just words. The understanding is very clear. They're two luminaries. They give light. They both have a source. It's called Tiferes of Ima. Get rid of the Kabbalistic words because you need a lot of background to understand what the Kabbalah. So there's a source that gives light to the sun and to the moon. The moon complained, so the moon stopped getting the light from the source. It gets it only from the sun now. And when in the future, the moon will get the light straight from the source as the sun does.
I got the concept 100%, but I thought we were understanding the Chama, the Shemesh is Havaya, and the Levana is Elokim. Yes or no?
I suggest that we continue on. It's getting too sidetracked here. If you have questions, we can talk about it later.
Okay, sorry. We'll move on later.
Nothing to be sorry about. It's just that I think this is all we need to really know right now. What else do you want to?
No. You've laid out the concept very clearly. I just didn't understand the Kabbalistic issue. I'll take it offline.
Well, it's clear. Havaya and Elokim, Elokim, as far as a light goes, receives straight from the source, as the sun does.
Right, but the question is, why is the source Tiferes Ima and not something higher than that?
So
we'll take it offline.
The Kabbalah of Tiferes of Ima.
Okay.
So Tiferes Ima is a very high level. Let me just tell you that.
Okay.
In general, as I said, even Chachma of even in the world of Asiya, Malchus of Asiya is a very high level. So I'm not sure when you say the word high, you need to really review that because what does high mean? To me, if you're not going to eat today just to indulge and you'll eat for God is also high. So I'm not sure when you say high, what do you mean by high?
Could I intervene?
Let me just answer the question. Let me take one more stab at it. What I mean by high is we're talking about ultimately Elokim is going to give a gilui, apparently a gilui greater than Havaya gives. So if you're talking about a source that energizes Elokim to the point where it is Megale, in some sense, greater than Havaya, you would think that the source would be,
no. What you're asking me with Tiferes Ima, we're not talking about that. That's why I asked you if you understood the distinctions. We're not talking about Elokim being higher than Havaya now. Now we're talking about Elokim being equal to Havaya.
I understand, but they're both drawing. Havaya is drawing from
and they're both drawing from a source called Tiferes.
And you would think the highest source is Ori and Sof, no?
Okay. What do you want to say?
Is that not true? I'm sorry.
The highest source? I don't know. What do you mean by high? High to me, as I said, when a person eats l'shem shamayim for God's sake and not for their own selfish, to me is very high level. I don't know what you mean by high. High is a very relative term.
When the Seder Hishtalshelus, the highest is Ori and Sof. Yes or no?
No.
Okay. Then I have a misunderstanding.
Atzmus is the highest.
Okay.
In this whole thing, Atzmus is the highest level. But there's a whole Hishtalshelus. You know how many levels there are? There are infinite amount of levels. Everything is higher relative to the level below it.
I thought Atmos is synonymous with the Orient Sof, but whatever.
It's not.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, there's nothing to apologize. I'm just trying to explain to you that when you talk about literally millions and millions, infinite levels, every level is higher compared to the lower. That's critical in the process here, because
Okay.
every level needs to climb and reach the level above it. It's like rungs in a ladder.
Okay.
So right now we're talking about Zah and Malchus, and their source is the level above them. We're not talking about higher than that. Higher than that is another story.
Okay, thank you. Now I got it. Thank you.
Eliezer, you wanted to add something?
Well, Yitzhak, what did you said? Now you got it. What did you get?
I got that we're talking that above Malchus is the drawing down, is Malchus is the lowest of Atzmus, and above it's drawing down into Atzilus, and Malchus is I guess is the Kesser of the Malchus of Atzmus is the Kesser of Atzilus.
What?
That's
what? Where'd you get
No.
that from? Who said?
No?
No. Where'd you
No?
get that from? No. Where did?
Well, there's something. There's a connection between Atzmus and Atzilus. No.
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 What is Atzmus by you? What are you referring to by Atzmus?
The essence of God, the highest level.
No. That's not discussed here altogether.
Let me just take it offline.
Okay. Fine. Eliezer, you want to say something in general, or?
Well, I think that if I could understand Yitzhak's question, maybe I could phrase it a little, because I do think it's germane to what we were talking. Your beautiful outline that you presented. I think what Yitzhak was trying to get at is that it sounds like the ultimate yichud that we're going to experience. You start your discussion by bli gvul and gvul, or at the levels of sovev and mamale. So where is that going to ultimate yichud occur in Lasi Lavo that we're all striving for and praying for? It seems to say right now, again, Yitzhak, we didn't get to the Ein Od part, but in the level that the Shemesh and the Levana is the same level, seems like that yichud is going to occur in Tiferes Shalbina, which is that the yichud will happen within structure, because structure really starts from Chachman down, the Esther spheres, right? So that yichud is going to ultimately occur within structure, within the spheros, and within the spheros, I guess it's within Tiferes Shalbina, and that's where it's going to happen. It's not going to be that we're going to be oy structure and be able to have this yichud in levels of Kesser or in so Livnei Tzimtzum, or what you're talking about. It's going to be within structure, and it's going to be in the Tiferes Shalbina. Again, not including the discussion of Ein Od, which I have no idea. We haven't gotten to that. Maybe is that presenting it fairly, Yitzhak? What your question was? It seemed like it was a lower level.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah. It's within structure is your point. It's not above structure.
Right.
Okay. And that's the misunderstanding. And I don't know, Rabbi Jacobson, if Eliezer explained it to me correctly, then you're saying that this happens within structure, not above structure. I guess. It's in the Or HaGvul.
I honestly didn't understand so much what Eliezer said, but if you guys are at peace with it all, great. Let's move on.
Okay. Eliezer, that was helpful for me, but I'll let Rabbi Jacobson resume the class.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we continue on a new paragraph for the bottom of page 1208, and he says like this. So we've established that there's a level where the moon and the sun become equal, and then there's a level where Eishes Chayla Teres Baila, that the darkness itself radiates, and that becomes the source of light to all the spheres. So that's already how Malchus goes higher than Zah, not just equal to Zah. And that itself, of course, are level, and there are levels below that. So now he continues. Ve'ein zeh k'mayim Razal, and this is not like what it says in Razal, La'osid HaKadosh Baruch Hu moitzi chama min ha'teika, that in the future God will remove the sun from its sheath. The sheath. So what that means is, what the pasuk says, Shemesh u'mogen Hashem Elokim. Shemesh mogen literally means a shield or a sheath. So the sun is seen as something that's encased inside of a encasing. So the word mogen is sometimes used nartik. Nartik is like a sheath or a shield. There must be another word in English for it. Even in today's science, when they talk about the sun, they say that the sun has the corona and it has its
a membrane. Is that the better word you're looking for?
When there's a solar eclipse, so you see the outer
corona,
the element of the sun. So it says, so today, for the sun to be able to be effective and not burn us alive, so the nartik is necessary. This is how Chazal and Chassidus explains. It's necessary because in some ways it protects and doesn't let the sunlight completely be unfettered, unfiltered. So La'asid Lavi, it says, God will remove the sun from its nartik. So that's, of course, a high level of revelation, which isn't just talking physically, but also spiritually. So he's saying that what we're talking about now is higher than that. It's not that. That's another discussion. That's how he's going to explain now this idea. And they're going to explain that what we're discussing is higher than that. Shekol zeh yitekev zirichas hashemesh. When you remove the sun, the chama, from its nartik, from its case, so to speak, it's still all about revelation. It's all about takeoff and just being more intensity of the sunshine will be much more intense. This statement in Maimer Azal is telling us that the sun will be much more intense than it is now. The light will be a takeoff will be increasingly intense, which is all again about revelation. That the revelation will be greater. Here we want to talk about how the darkness becomes a source of revelation. That's a whole other story. That's a much deeper concept. So that's what he's going to be saying right now. So, but first let's do a parenthesis, which is relevant, but I don't want to impede the flow here of the idea. So that's what he's going to be comparing. That's not just, we're not talking about revelation here. We're talking about understanding how concealment, the cheshach itself, laila atzma yoyer, that the night itself radiates, not how there's more light. So L'Asid Lavi will have more revelation. That's true. But we're discussing here another thing entirely. In the parentheses, he just qualifies to explain what the nartik and the shemesh are in context of Ayin Elokim. So he says like this, Ubezeh gam ken hakavana. In this too, that we're talking about, the revelation will become greater. In this too, the kavana, the intention is sheyia gili gam ba'nartik. So in other words, what he's saying here is not just he'll remove the sun from the nartik, it means that the sunshine will also permeate that veil or that shield or case. Because you can say like this, today, not L'Asid Lavi, in our time, the sun is encased in a case. That case somewhat, what's the word I want to use? Somewhat dilutes the power of the sun. So we're able to receive it. Similar to what Shemesh Hamogim, what a teacher does, that he makes some type of conceal somewhat of his intensity so the student can receive it. It's like we put on shades when we can't look at the sun. So we put on a shade. The shade allows us to look at the sun because the sun is not in its full intensity. Here, the shade is not on the behalf of the human being. The shade is on the behalf of the sun. I'm not going to call it a shade, but it's a form of a nartik. Something diminishes and dilutes that energy. So you can say, okay, God will then remove that and we'll have the sun in its pure sunlight without any filter. But he's saying, no, the intention is not just that. The intention is, that it should radiate, that the nartik should no longer just be a filter, that it itself should also be permeated with the intense sunlight. So he says, as it's known. And of course, this is mostly ruchnius, but spiritually. the Masha Kodesh Baruch Hu Moitzi Chama, the idea that God is removing the sun from its case. Hu Hagili D'Shem Havaya the Le'ela. That refers to the revelation of the Havaya de Le'ela, the higher level of Havaya that we learned about. Havaya de Le'ela, the Eira Bligvul, the Eira and stuff like before the Tzimtzum. Sha'oz Yeh Hagili B'Hashem Elokim. So what does it mean to remove the sun? The sun is referring to Havaya de Le'ela, and Havaya de Le'ela is being removed. You're removing the nartik, which really means that intensity of Havaya de Le'ela is shining also in Shem Elokim, because Shemesh and Magen Havaya Elokim, right? The Shemesh and the nartik refers to Havaya Elokim, but not just the lower Havaya Elokim, the higher Havaya. That the Eirei and Sofa Bligvul, after all the Aveda that we do, L'Asid Lave will radiate through the nartik, but without any diminishment. So today, the Tzimtzum, as we learned, has two effects. One is on the Eira Gvul, it conceals the energy that manifests within existence that we shouldn't feel it. And therefore, it's here, but we don't experience it until we reveal it. Havaya de Le'ela recedes, that higher divine consciousness recedes, that the consciousness of existence does not have that consciousness. Through Aveda, that means through our Rotze and our Aveda, Birurim, everything we do, we climb, and ultimately we transform that. The Tzimtzum, that was like the nartik, that concealed to some extent the sun, is now not concealing it. So the sun, the Havaya de Le'ela, is shining through the nartik in the fullest sense of the word. But this is all Havaya Elokim and Gilui. That's not what we're discussing, however, here. The parenthesis just comes to qualify that this idea of removing the sun from the case is the Gilui of Havaya de Le'ela through Elokim. Okay. So in other words, you'll see, like the teacher, that the different filters he used, once L'Asid Love comes and the student has reached the level of the teacher, he will see the filter itself will also be an extension of the very brilliant and intense light of the sun. By contrast, however, what it says, the night will shine like the day. Not the nartik atzmei. Not that the sun's intensity will be dominant and the nartik will also be on that level, but the nartik itself, that was once a state of concealment. The nartik itself, that shell itself, or that shield, sheath, or case, will be illuminating, which is a big chiddush, because till now the sun is the illuminator. This is, it itself will illuminate. The Shemesh Shemogan Havaya Elokim, because Shemesh Shemogan, like I just explained, the sun and its sheath is Havaya and Elokim. Those are the two levels. The Shem Elokim Ubchinis Mogan V'Nartik HaShemesh. The name of Elokim is a Mogan V'Nartik. It's a sheath, a shield, a case of Shem Havaya. I'm sorry, of the Shemesh, of the sun. U'La'osid, and the future. Not only, like he said now in the parentheses, the Nartik will shine with Havaya. La'osid, and Nartik, the Shem Elokim Yair, that another thing will happen, that the nartik itself, take away the sun, all you have now is a sheath, a shield, a power that's concealed. That itself of Shem Elokim will radiate, which is the level of Malchus, will be Gili Er Mitzadatzme. It itself will be the source of a Gili Er on its own, independent of the sun. So that means that this power of concealment, it itself will be now a source of revelation in the future. The Dover Zeh, Lo Yehoya Oid B'chlolas HaYishtalshlus. And this thing never happened yet in all of Ishtalshlus. In the general cosmic order, Dover Zeh Lo Yehoya Oid. Ukamoy lifnei miyut hayireach. So now he's going to say, what do you mean what about what happened before the moon was diminished? What was going on then? So he's going to discuss now how it was before the moon was diminished. and what we're talking about now that did not happen in the Shtalshlus. Does not happen in Shtalshlus. It says like this. Like before the Miyut, before the moon was diminished, Shoyeshavim became Masan. Then the moon and the sun were equal in stature. Like the verse says, God created two great luminaries. We don't yet have the expression Moyer HaKotten, Moyer HaGodla, Moyer HaKotten, the great lumen, the large one and the small one. Because initially they were equal in stature. The Lefi Pshata Inyan, according to the basic interpretation of this phenomenon, of this event, of this reality, Shetana, that the moon complained, that when the moon complained that two kings cannot have one crown, you have two kings, two great luminaries, you can't have one crown for two kings. Can't serve two kings, you need to have two crowns. Or you have to choose which one is your king. So according to the pshat of that complaint, the mere fact, by basic interpretation, that the moon came with such a complaint was because God created two kings, two great luminaries, and placed one crown on both of them. Or else the moon would not have complained. So based on pshat, the pshat of the Inyan is that before the moon was diminished, that indeed was the case. There was one crown on two kings. I'm not talking about technically how the crown can fit on two heads. But bottom line, there were two Melachim, two great kings, and one crown. So we're learning the subject. So let's see what he's developing here. Like the Rabbeinu Bachai says in Parsha Pinchas, what does he say? So Parsha Pinchas talks about the offering you bring on Rosh Chodesh. Remember, the Gemara in Chulin, this is a Gemara in Chulin. I probably should tell the full story to understand the context here. So the Gemara says there that this moon is called Moyer HaKotten. David hu HaKotten, Yaakov hu HaKotten. The Gemara is called Moyer HaKotten. Why is it called a small moon? When the first it says they were two great Me'eres HaGdelim. And suddenly you call the moon the small. So the Gemara says something happened. The moon came with a complaint to God. Two crown, you can't have two kings. You can't. How can one crown serve two kings? You're appointed us both in heaven. We're both great luminaries. So God said, you're right. Go diminish yourself. And that's why the Moira God became a Moira Cotton. The moon became a smaller luminary. And now there is only one Kesser and one crown and one Melech, which is the sun. And the moon is now a receiver, is no longer that type of mashpia. The moon receives from the sun. Then it says, Heviu alai kaporet, that on Rosh Chodesh, bring for me, God says, an atonement. An atonement that on the fact that I told the moon to diminish itself. So God feels he needs an atonement for this. Like in other words, it was kavyachol, a transgression. And you bring on Rosh Chodesh a soyer, a chatas, you bring an animal, an offering. The offering on Rosh Chodesh in the Beis Hamikdash was an atonement for God, not an atonement for us. Now, of course, you can imagine everybody wonders what that means exactly. But I'm not going to go into that right now. But now he's addressing this Soyer Rosh Chodesh, which is coming as an atonement for the Mir Tayarech. So he says like this. The Zel Shene is actually going to quote the Rabbeinu Bachai. Omra hakoved lefnei habina. Malchus said before Bina, Malchus would be the moon, covered. Efshel l'shnei Elokim. Is it possible for two kings? And he's explaining according to Kabbalah. Shehem hateferes va'kovet. That teferes and kovet. That the level of teferes, the sun, and the level of Malchus, the moon, kovet. Sheishtamshu b'tziner echad. Is it possible for two kings, teferes and kovet? Teferes literally means beauty, kovet means honor. That they should both receive from the same channel? And that not each king should have their own channel? You're appointing two kings. each of them should have their own channel that connects. So Malchus said this to Bina. So Bina is what we talk to Tiferes Avima. Bina is the level that is, he says he spoke to the Eibishter. We're talking about Elokus as it manifests in Bina. And that's what the Kovet complaint. That's what he says in Bechai. I think that's where he stops. He says Vizel Shein. I have to look it up. But let's continue on. We'll see where he goes here. So the next page, 1209. Umavur b'malkam acher. And it's explained elsewhere. Hakavona, the intention in this b'chai, the b'chinas Malchus kibla ma'abino derech ma'ivir hazah. The Malchus received from Bina traveling through Zah. In other words, the moon was receiving from Bina, but it had to go through Zah. It had to pass through Zah, the Shemesh. V'yadua, the b'amshocha shebederech ma'ivir. And it's known that when the Amshacha comes b'derech ma'ivir, passing through, it does not change. It's like a funnel. So let me explain that. In Chassidus, it talks about two ways that a transmission can flow. One is called ma'ivir, derech ma'ivir. One is derech hislapshus. The difference is ma'ivir means it's just passing through. It's like pouring wine through a funnel. The funnel just channels it. It doesn't change it. Hislapshus is if you poured the wine into some other item and you mixed it with other ingredients, then it would actually change the quality and the texture and the ingredients of the wine and the personality of the wine. So the example of Chassidus would be the difference between ma'ivir would be the way when a person writes an intelligent idea on paper. So the seichel is passing through the fingers. The fingers don't have any intelligence. They're just instruments. So that's passing through. Hislapshus is how the seichel manifests in the moyach, in the actual brain. So the brain, the seichel actually is mislabish in it. It encloses itself in it and resides there. You can't say your fingers have become intelligent. The brain itself becomes an intelligent vehicle and appliance, so to speak, for the mind. So there's ma'ivir and hislapshus. What he's saying now is that the kavana, what is explained to Rabbeinu Bechai, how it was initially, was that Malchus was receiving b'derech ma'ivir, and ma'ivir does not change the flow. It does not weaken the light. So in other words, you could have two powerful luminaries, and even though it's coming from the sun to the moon, but it's just passing through. So the moon is receiving the same power, but it's passing through from Bina through Zah. That's what he said here. I suggest right now skipping the parentheses because it's going to complicate matters. I'll come back to it. I'm going to read after the parentheses just to finish the subject. But the parentheses is a little more complicated, so that's why I'm skipping. So based on that, he's introduced a new idea now. Till now, we were thinking that Bina is the source. It transmits light to the sun and to the moon. And that's it. But now he's saying it's going through the sun to the moon. But since it's derech ma'ivir, it's only passing through, the moon is therefore as strong as the sun is. Malchus is just as strong as Zah, because Zah did not dilute it or weaken it. It's not that the moon is reflecting the light of the sun. The moon is just receiving the light of Bina through the sun. That's how it was initially. That means they both were both benefiting from one crown. The keser is Tiferes Avima or Bina. That's the crown. The one crown is extending light to Zah, through Zah to Malchus. Both of them are kings. They're both equally strong because Zah is just a channel, just like a funnel. So the moon is not a reflection of the sun. The moon is getting its light from the same place the sun is, but it's just passing through. So it'd be like, let's say someone, the Rebbe is giving somebody shliach mitzvah, giving you a dollar to give to someone else. When you receive it from someone else, you're just a shliach of the Rebbe. So essentially, nothing was diluted. It's not like the Rebbe teaching something to a student, and then the student is teaching it to another student. Then it would go through a shift, a change, because the student would now explain it on his terms. But if it's just passing through, you're getting exactly the same connection. The last shliach is a shliach of the first mishaleach. Nothing is weaker. He's not a shliach of the shliach. He's a shliach of the mishaleach. The shliach is just a channel, a funnel that passing through. So nothing was diluted. So the moon is in full strength. But clearly the moon was not satisfied with that. So let's see what he says. Okay. That same channel that went from Bina to Zah, remember Bina is Moichin, and it brings is Eim Habonim Smecha, it's the mother of the children, which are the Midas. So the Bina gave birth to the Midas, that's a chinner that from where it comes to Zah. This very same channel just continued flowing. Just as it flowed to Zah, it continues flowing, meir boy. Without any diminishment, it continues flowing without any compromise. However, this is not what we're discussing here, because this we understand. So let me just put it into context. Based on the Rabbeinu B'chai, we have an understanding of what means this Keser Echad. That initially there was one Keser, Bina, and there were not two channels. One channel went to Zah, went to Malchus, sun, moon, without any diminishment. The moon was not satisfied with that. It didn't want to get it through the sun. It didn't get diminished. What the moon was bothered by, I'm not sure. It doesn't say here. We have to look it up, maybe in the B'chai. But clearly the moon was not satisfied. Maybe he just didn't like the idea that it's not getting it straight from Bina. So that's why the covered moon came to Bina and said, can two kings receive from one channel? You're making me receive from the same channel that Zah is receiving. We need different channels. So that's when the Eibishter answered, or Bina answered, okay, you know what? You get diminished, and that's that. Now, when things go back, and the moon will become like the sun, so we want, again, Keser Echad. So what we'd say is that the moon will receive exactly like the sun receives from Bina. But it's still all receiving light. It's not about the darkness. There's nothing here that justifies or redeems the concealed state. We're only talking here about what level of revelation it is. So that's what he says. Kol zeh u'mashamachos mekabelos er momayla. Now, he's going to go now into a long discussion, and I need to explain it before we learn it. I don't know. I think we should stop here. Maybe I'll do the parentheses, or maybe I'll wait till tomorrow. Let me see in a minute. He's going to go now into discussing. So I'm just filling in words now. However, what we're talking about here is not how Malchus is receiving either through the sun or straight from Bina light. That's all still receiving light. That's still connecting to Havaya. Elokim is connecting to Havaya. We want to know what about the very concealment itself, or even the diminishment of the moon. And that's a whole other chiddush, the chiddush of Laila Kiyem Yer, that the darkness itself, Elokim itself, will be a source of light, not through Bina and not through Zah. Like he said clearly, not from Tiferes Avima, not from any of these levels. It itself is a creation of God's, and therefore reflects and can reveal a divine dimension that's beyond all these revelations. That's essentially where he's going. But the next piece is going to be how this plays out in the Tzimtzum. Because in the Tzimtzum, you have Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. That's concealed, the Tzimtzum conceals it. But then you have the Rishimu, which is a state of concealment, but it's letters that are there that are concealed. So that concealment of those letters, we know they will reconnect to the light once the Kaf comes. It would illuminate those letters. But what about the very concealment? Will that also be elevated? And that's what he's going to discuss next. how this plays itself out in the root of the Rishimu, how the concealment itself is going to radiate, not just with the Oyer Ein Sof that shines through it, but the letters themselves, the very substance, the very letters, the very concealment itself will be a source of light of its own. So we left out was like this, the parentheses. I'm not going to learn further right now because it's a whole subject. So I'll stop by the Kiyudur, the Esis Rishimu. Should we do the parentheses? I'm just concerned it's going to take more than 3 minutes. It needs to go through.
So the Malchus is going to be higher than Tiferes the Bino, or will still get from Tiferes the Bino?
Higher.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question to ask you.
I don't know. 1 second. Let me correct that. Not necessarily the word higher is not the right word. He says these words on the previous page. He says, "B'chinas Malchus b'chinas Helen teir mitzad atzma loy mipnei shetekabel b'chinas teferes de'ima." That's the words he uses. It will radiate on its own, not because it's receiving from teferes de'ima. So I can't tell you how high, but it definitely not because it's teferes. It will be its own power, and that will be mashpia into zah. That he says clearly.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question to ask you. Doesn't this follow the same theme as when we were talking about the meals of Shabbat? That it was first Keter and Bina that were the guests of Malchut, and then it was the second meal of Shabbat was that Malchut was elevated into Bina, and as if he was inviting Keter into, and then the Seuda Shelishit was going to be the whole everybody being elevated to the level of Keter. So they were bypassing all of these, just like you're talking about right now.
It's possible. I'd have to look it up in the previous volume too to confirm that, but it could be. I need to look it up because I don't remember right now.
Because Lasset Lavo essentially is 160. Shabbat is 1/60th of when Mashiach will come. So it would make sense that it would follow the same theme.
Or the whole Lasset Lavo is called Shabbat. Yom Shekuli Shabbos Menucha L'Chayalam.
Correct.
But I would want to look it up before I answer that.
Okay.
You will have to say that is higher than Tiferes De'imo, because otherwise it will be mashpia for the Zoh. Zoh is mekabel now from Tiferes De'imo. So if it will be mekabel from Malchus and it's not higher than Tiferes De'imo, how is it going to work?
Where did we say it's going to?
It's a good question, but I don't have enough information here in this mimer to answer that question. It's a good question. What will be the role of Tiferes De'imo then? That's a good question. And
that was my question. That's why
it's a whole new question.
Exactly
I never heard
my
this
question.
No, it's not a question.
It's exactly my question.
I never heard that question before.
That was the implication of my question. It's the Tiferes
Eliezer, you
De'imo
understood that
doesn't.
was the question?
No, I it's different. I think it's different, but okay. And you want to comment on that because I have my own question on Rabbi Taitel's question.
What the role of Tiferes De'imo will be when Malchus radiates on its own. The Rebbe Rashab may explain it later, maybe not. I don't speculate because he doesn't say enough here information for me to answer that. Right. And frankly, it's not even so relevant because it's like asking a question. Every level in Ishtalshalos will exist. They will all have their role. I'm not worried about their roles. Atzilus will have a role. Bria will have a role. Even when Dira B'Tachtenim is complete, and you have the Yesh below, is a Dira to a godliness. There's still going to be Atzilus, Bria, Tzir, Asiya. There's going to be Ak and Akudim and Akudim, and everything's going to exist. Their roles may be different and how we look at them, but they'll all exist. So Tiferes De'imo will have its role. I don't know what the exact role is. And remember, I don't want to look at this as like a mechanical operation here. Like, okay, if it gets from, you have to understand the Havana of it, the spiritual understanding of it. So the key here to remember is this. And this is why, let's just keep very focused on the message here. He wants to explain that there's going to be great revelations in the future. There's going to be great revelations Can everybody mute? It's just very disturbing. There are going to be great revelations of Havaya Elokim, Havaya de Latata, Havaya de Le'ela, before the Tzimtzum, the Oyer. He wants to now introduce a whole other dimension of how the very darkness and the very concealment in the Tzimtzum has in itself a power. And that's going to ultimately redeem that. We're not just going to say, you know what, it was worth all the pain of the concealment through Golas because we reached such great revelation. That's one thing, that's true. But the very concealment is also going to reveal for us something on its own that's completely different than what revelation reveals. That's the key thing to remember here. Now, Tiferes Dima and Zoh and Malchus are all levels, and he's explaining them in that context, that Malchus now receives from Zoh, which receives from Tiferes Dima. There'll be a stage like it was at the beginning, before the moon was diminished, where Malchus and Zoh are both receiving from Bina. And then there's a level where Malchus elevates and it has its own power that's not connected to Ur. But you'll still need Ur. It doesn't say La'asid Lavi, we're only going to have Ein Eid. The first half of the pasuk is not disappearing. You still need Havaya Elokim. And B'Shamayim Emal V'La'aretz Mitachas. Ein Eid does not eliminate the yichud of Havaya and Elokim. It's adding, it's not diminished. So when you talk about Malchus having its own it's the revelation that comes from Malchus, it's not contradicting the idea that there'll be a son, and there'll be revelation, and there'll be Tiferes Avima, and there'll be Zoh, and there'll be other Giluim. He's just adding now. What he's adding now, one second. What he's adding now is that there's another dimension that's going to be revealed that besides the revelation track. So all that exists is nothing's going to be weakened. It's only going to add to something. Now, the question, where will Zoh receive from? I don't have a problem saying it will receive from Tiferes Avima and from Malchus. What's the problem with saying that? It will have both milas. From Tiferes the Ima and levels it will receive Gilui, that's important, Gilui Elikus. And from Malchus it will receive the Kayach of Helam, the Gilui that comes from Helam. Like we're going to learn what that means. Atzmi. So that would be my brief answer based on basic what Chassidus.
This is fascinating.
Stay away. One second.
Why do you need
One second. Stay away. Look, you asked me a question. You want an answer. I'm giving you a full answer. I would suggest, let me finish. So like this. So I would stay away from mechanical discussions of where do you fit things. Put something on this shelf or that shelf. Understand the Havana. You need to understand that the theme here, the concept, not technically whether the sun receives from this wire or from that wire. What the theme here is what we're discussing now. So in addition to revelation, in other words, it does say the sun will be removed from its shell, from its case. That's a fact. But what he's discussing here is something additional, something other. And that is the element of the night itself shining, the nartik itself, the shell itself illuminating with something.
Rabbi Jacobson.
This is very fascinating, but still in Havana, like you said, we don't know why do you need, if you have the Helem will shine, why do you need also the Gilui from Tiferes the Imo? The Havana, we don't know.
If you go back to the classes I've given, I can tell you I probably spoke 40 hours just on this subject. So I'm not disappointed, but I can tell you, when we spoke at length back in volume 2, he spoke, what's the mila of Ein Seif HaBligvul? And he spoke, the mila of Etzem. But you have to understand, Dira B'Tachtenim is Gilui and Etzem together. You can't have one without the other. And that's just something that I've explained at length. You never recall me speaking about this? Why you need Gilui even when you have Etzem? That would be like saying, that would be like saying that because the child, the farm boy cried kukuriku, that's why we have etzem. What do we need to learn Torah and daven with kavanah?
What is the Helem Moisi? That's it. I understand, but it's missing in Havana. That's it.
No, I tell you, it's not missing in Havana. We discussed this at length. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
No, I understand what you said about why we need the gilui and the oil, but what is the chidush now that the elam?
You don't understand why you need. It's the mila of etzem. That's the mila megilui.
Okay.
Rabbi Jacobson,
Yeah.
I have a question, Havana here. It says I've been understanding it that when it says umashaka serv lahalayla kayom yair, which was in the page before, that was talking about the Levana will shine like the moon, but it says Lila Kayom Yair Huanartek Atzmoy Yair. It seems like there's two sources of darkness here. The Nartek is for the Shemesh itself, and the Levana, which seems they're two different ones. Are we talking about two different sources of Lila that are going to shine?
No. Nartik is the level of Malchus, Elokim. It essentially, the part of the Nartik that conceals is similar to the moon in a state of concealment. That's all.
But they're two different things.
Physically, yes, but they're both rooted in the Koyach HaHela.
But in Lasi Lavo, will there be a difference between the Nartik that is shining and that becomes not concealing, not diminishing the sunlight, as well as the moon will be shining on its own, receiving from Tiferes Bina itself?
It's both of them, yes, are revealing a level that's higher than revelation. Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so we'll do the parentheses tomorrow, which is fine. It's not going to change. They'll just add a whole dimension. So to sum up, there's a bunch of stages that will happen. One is higher levels of revelation. There'll be where the moon or Malchus is receiving straight from Tiferes of Ima, similar to the way it was before the diminishment. What needs to be understood is it doesn't mean exactly the similar or different a bit, because the moon complained that it didn't want to have it through the sun. So La'aseh will come through the sun like a tzinner b'derech ma'ivir, keser echad, could be. And then regardless, then there's the highest level we're discussing here is that the darkness itself will radiate. And that has another quality altogether. And ultimately, as I just said, you need both because you want etzem and giluyim. You want the coarse essence, that's going to come through the concealment, einoid. But you also want it in a revealed way that we all can relate to it, and a revealed way that is appreciated and all of that comes with giluyim. So that's briefly what it is. Okay. Anybody wants to still ask anything, or we're covered for today?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure.
Amazing.
So we'll stop here.
Amazing. Thank you.